you got involved in anti-slavery.
Yes. I found out just serendipitously, just quite by surprise, that there was slaves in the world. When I was a young man, I marched with, I was on the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech march. I was there. I joined the NAACP. I was quite a civil libertarian and a civil rights activist. And I found out that there were still slaves in the world and no one really cared. And the slaves that I came across, just reading a newspaper, The Economist, you can buy and sell black women for $15 in certain parts of North Africa. So I read that, I was shocked. It was on page 47. But I did some research, and I found through Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch that indeed in North Africa, the Africans right underneath the first tier, on the top, if Africa is an ice cream cone, the top part of it is Arab dominated, and right below that is black Africa. Well, the Arabs have black slaves, have always had black slaves. They came over from Saudi Arabia, invaded the north of Africa, dominated it, and went into slave raiding in the south. We only know about the slaves that came to the west, that came across the oceans. We don't know much at all about the slaves that went across the sands through the Sahara. But what was shocking is that it still goes on. And I found people from Sudan and from Mauritania who were escaped slaves. And I called up my Congressman Barney Frank, and I said, you know, gosh, of all the human rights there are in the world, the first one, apart from that you should live, is that you should be free. And here you have cases of one man owning another, and in this country, we tore our country apart, America, over the issue of one man owning another. We ought to do something about this. He says, you're absolutely right. Do your research. Let's get the black community involved, etc. So I did my research. I met the Sudanese community in New York City. I met the Mauritanian community in New York City. I put them together. And we started a movement to free the slaves of Mauritania and Sudan. It was a fascinating thing. I was able to, on a shoestring budget, I was able to put together a very unlikely coalition of left and right, because it's not an issue of left or right, it's an issue of right or wrong. So we, on the one hand, we had Pat Robertson and we had Barney Frank. Now, we didn't put them in the same room, you know, but we had them because they were both, you know, against the enslavement of people, and particularly black people.
Found something they could agree on.
Something they could agree on. And in fact, it continued to be a left-right issue. We had Senator Brownback, a Republican from Kansas, who was always very, very strong on this, and the entire black caucus, almost the entire black congressional caucus. We got on board. Donald Payne from New Jersey was one of the big, Eleanor Holmes Norton was one of the big women speakers on this. And what we found was that Sudan, and this is interesting now, Sudan was captured by, now we would know to call them jihadists, but in the 90s we didn't know what jihad was. It was a dictatorship that was much like the Taliban. And they declared a jihad against the black people in the South who were mostly Christian and animists, tribalists. Okay? And the jihad is meant to extend Islamic rule over places where it's not yet in effect. And the jihad had killed about 2 million Christians, mostly, in the South. My goodness. Now, that was not in the globe, you see. That's the problem. Not much, anyway. It was on page 17. And what would happen was that raiders from the north, paid for by Khartoum, the capital, these Arab raiders would storm African villages, shoot the men because they didn't want men, and take the women and children captives. Okay. Slavery in the Arab world is not like slavery here because they didn't need muscles. They didn't need musculature. They didn't have plantations, tobacco, cotton. They were doing it for concubines. They were doing it to, you know, to inseminate slave women to make more of their own civilization. They were doing it to capture little boys they would take as goat herds, and girls for sex slaves. That's what they were doing. I ran into a group, a marvelous group called Christian Solidarity International out of Zurich, who would fly into South Sudan illegally because there was a war between the North and the South, and find ways to buy back the slaves. And I was the American witness, more or less, to that. And I wrote about it. And I finally, on Passover, 2001, I went. I took a plane.
That was in the spring.
I took a plane from Zurich to Nairobi. And then we took I can't say where, a small plane, and it landed in southern Sudan. It was guarded by the South Sudanese army. This was basically a Christian black African army who was fending off the jihad from the north. We were protected by them. And the local Arabs nearby who didn't want a war with the Africans because they wanted to share crops and share trade and everything, they were paid to go fetch slaves in the north, to buy them back or find them wandering around and bring them back. So Christian Solidarity would go in there with duffel bags full of cash, and they would make these, and they would free people. And I'll never forget the time when I saw the leader of Christian Solidarity International say to a group of gathered African slaves brought back, "You're free today." It's amazing.
And what happened to them after that?
After that, they went back to their villages, and they lived the life that they're living.
So they stayed in Sudan.
They stayed in Sudan, right. Now, one or two of them escaped to America, and we worked with a few of them. Francis Bach, B-O-K, if your listeners want to Google Francis Bach, you'll see he wrote an incredible book about my escape from slavery.
Francis is a he.
Is a he, right. Francis is a Dinka. Dinkas are known to be extraordinarily tall, very, very good looking, and absolutely black. And just gorgeous. Francis was 9 years old, and he was captured and taken, and his parents were killed. And he saw people shot down and raped, and he was forced to serve his Arab master for years. They tried to convert him, but the interesting thing religiously is that his Christianity made him strong and kept him praying and hoping and with some optimism that he would escape, and he did. And he came to the States, and we, at the American Anti-Slavery Group, which is my group, we met him, and we gave him a platform to speak around the country. He was here in New Hampshire. I'm sure people here in churches probably or synagogues have heard him speak. So I worked on that case for 8 or 9 years.
Now, is he still around doing this?
Francis is actually in Sudan right now building a school.
Really?
Yes. At the end of the day, what happened was we got George Bush to intervene. This was an interesting, again, a left-right coalition with plenty of Democrats, congressional Democrats, not only the Black Caucus, but others, and the Christian right came together. I mean, if you can do that, you can do anything, right? And pressured Bush to send Senator Danforth as a negotiator, and they made a peace treaty between the North and the South. So right now there's a peace treaty between the North and the South. I don't have huge hopes that it will stay that way.
Right.
The black Southern Christians have an opportunity in 2011 to separate off and have their own state. That would be a miracle. If they could. It would be the second Israel, in a sense. It would be the second non-Muslim entity in that area. If it ever happened, that's why it won't happen without a war. As soon as they signed the papers for the peace treaty, over to the left, you all know about Darfur. Now, that's the big word, is Darfur. The Darfuris are Africans who are Muslim but still oppressed by the Arabs, and they revolted against Khartoum because they wanted the good deal that the Southern Christians had, right? And then all hell broke loose, and they're being slaughtered and raped and enslaved at the moment. And there's a big movement on college campuses and across the country about Save Darfur. People forget that it really is a case of, it's Arab imperialism. But that's, so I helped spark that.